A pregnant Amish girl was about to be hanged, until a giant mountain man stopped the judge. The rope swings in the cold wind. The church bell tolls. The crowd gathers, whispering as the noose tightens around her neck. A helpless young mother, belly heavy with child, stands condemned for a crime she did not commit. Then, thundering footsteps. A shadow falls across the gallows. A massive mountain man cuts her down, defying the law, defying the judge. The crowd gasps. Rifles are raised, but saving her life is only the beginning, because the secret she carries is more dangerous than the noose itself. Land, water, and blood that men will kill to control. And somewhere in the mountains, the husband everyone thought dead is still alive, and he knows the truth. Now, as mobs gather, barns burn, and a baby's first cry rings out in the firelight. Will mercy and faith save them? Or will the frontier's cruel justice take everything? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The bitter Colorado wind whipped across the courthouse square, cutting through wool coats and cotton shawls like a knife. Icicles hung from the wooden platform's edge, glinting in the weak winter sunlight. Emma Stoltzfus stood straight back despite her bound hands, her pregnant belly visible beneath her plain dress. The rough hemp rope scratched against her neck, and she fought to keep her chin high as her bonnet fluttered in the freezing breeze. Judge Harlan Briggs's voice boomed across the gathered crowd. Emma Stoltzfus, you have been found guilty of harboring a dangerous fugitive, your half-Apache husband, in defiance of territorial law. His silver hair caught the morning light as he gestured dramatically. Let this serve as an example to any who would shelter savages among us. The wooden planks creaked beneath Emma's feet. She closed her eyes and began to whisper a prayer, her lips moving silently as tears froze on her cheeks. The crowd pressed closer, their breath creating clouds in the frigid air. Some faces showed pity, others hatred. "String her up!" shouted a voice from the back. "No mercy for Indian lovers." "But she's with child," a woman protested softly, clutching her shawl tighter. Sheriff Amos Keene stood to the side, his badge catching the winter light. His fingers worked nervously at his gun belt as he stared at his boots, unable to meet Emma's steady gaze. The railroad men flanking Judge Briggs nodded in grim satisfaction, their fancy coats marking them as outsiders to the mountain town. "Sheriff," the judge commanded, "proceed with the execution." Keene's steps were heavy as he moved toward the lever that would open the trap door. Emma's prayer grew louder, her voice clear and unwavering in the morning air. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." A commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. People stumbled backward as a massive figure shouldered through them. Oliver Boone emerged like a bear breaking through underbrush, his buckskins worn and his beard wild. Scars crossed his weathered face, and his eyes blazed with righteous fury. "This ain't justice." His voice thundered across the square, causing horses to stamp nervously at their hitching posts. "You're about to murder an innocent woman and her unborn child." Judge Briggs's face flushed red with anger. "Seize that man. He's interfering with a lawful execution." But Oliver was already moving, taking the platform steps 3 at a time. His hunting knife flashed in the winter light as he slashed through the rope above Emma's head. The severed noose fell away as he swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed no more than a child. "Shoot him!" the judge bellowed, but the sheriff's hands shook as he drew his pistol. Gunshots cracked through the frozen air, but whether by design or trembling hands, they went wide. Oliver's massive form didn't even flinch. As he strode down the platform steps, Emma secure in his arms. Her bonnet had fallen away, revealing her dark hair as she pressed her face against his buckskin coat. The crowd parted before them, more from shock than fear. Oliver's boots crunched in the snow as he walked steadily forward, his breath steaming in the cold. The railroad men reached for their weapons, but the mountain man's fierce gaze promised violence to any who tried to stop him. "This is insurrection. Judge Briggs's voice cracked with rage. I'll have you both hung for this. But something in Oliver's deliberate stride, in the protective curve of his body around Emma's pregnant form, made even the angriest townspeople hesitate. Here was a man who had faced down grizzlies and survived mountain winters alone. His scarred face and calloused hands spoke of battles won and hardships endured. Emma's bound hands clutched at Oliver's coat as he carried her through the parting crowd. Her prayers had turned to quiet tears that froze on her cheeks. The mountain man's voice rumbled soft and low, meant for her ears alone. Easy now, Mrs. Stoltzfus. The Lord ain't finished with you yet. Sheriff Keene stood with his gun half raised, uncertainty written across his features. His deputy looked to him for orders, but the sheriff slowly lowered his weapon. I can't shoot a woman in her condition, he muttered, though his eyes showed he knew this choice might cost him his badge. The railroad men weren't so hesitant. They fired again, bullets splintering the wooden buildings behind Oliver's head. But he didn't break stride, or speed his pace as if his sheer will could turn aside lead. His dignity in the face of violence seemed to shame the mob, and gradually, the shots ceased. Wind whipped snow across the square as Oliver carried Emma past the last row of onlookers. Her black dress stood stark against his buckskins, her face pale but composed. The mountain man's footprints left deep impressions in the fresh snow, marking a trail that no one dared to follow. Judge Briggs's voice carried after them, shrill with impotent rage. I'll see you both dead for this. There's nowhere in these mountains you can hide. But Oliver kept walking, his steps steady and sure. Emma's weight in his arms seemed to anchor him, give purpose to his movements. The town watched in stunned silence as the unlikely pair disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving only tracks that the wind would soon erase. Behind them, the empty noose swayed in the bitter wind, and the gallows stood as a testament to justice denied. Or perhaps, in God's eyes, justice served. The crowd began to disperse, their muttering carried away by the gusting wind, while Sheriff Keene stared after the vanished figures with a mixture of relief and worry, creasing his weathered face. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising more snow. But Oliver walked on, bearing his precious burden, toward whatever sanctuary the wilderness might offer. Emma's prayers had fallen silent, replaced by the sound of their shared breathing and the crunch of snow beneath his boots. The morning that had dawned with the promise of death had transformed into something else entirely, a testimony to courage, to defiance in the face of injustice, to the unexpected mercy that could arrive in the form of a scarred mountain man who still believed in right and wrong. Judge Briggs raged and threatened, but his words were lost in the winter wind. The platform stood empty now, the violated rope a symbol of thwarted injustice. And somewhere in the swirling snow, a pregnant woman and her unlikely savior made their way toward the promise of survival, each step taking them further from the hatred they'd left behind. The tears on Emma's face had dried, and though her wrists remained bound, her head rested trustingly against Oliver's chest. The mountain man's heart beat steady and strong, a rhythm that seemed to promise protection, a chance at life snatched from the very shadow of death. As they disappeared into the whiteness of the storm, the last thing visible was Oliver's broad back, straight and unyielding, carrying his charge with the careful reverence of one who understood the precious nature of the burden he bore, not just a woman's life, but the life of her unborn child, and perhaps something more, the very essence of justice itself, preserved not by law, but by the conscience of a single man who refused to stand idle in the face of wrong. Oliver cradled Emma close as he navigated the narrow alleys behind the courthouse, his footsteps careful on the packed snow. The bitter wind whipped at her skirts while shouts echoed from the town square. Emma's body trembled against his chest, whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. "Hold fast, Mrs. Stoltzfus," he murmured, ducking beneath low-hanging eaves. "Got my mule tethered just past these buildings." Emma's bound hands clutched weakly at his buckskin coat. "The child," she whispered, her voice thin with exhaustion. "Everything's spinning." Almost there. Oliver quickened his pace, boots crunching through fresh powder. Behind a weathered stable, His brown mule stamped impatiently, breath steaming in the winter air. The animal's ears pricked forward at their approach. Oliver settled Emma carefully in the saddle, steadying her as she swayed. He worked quickly to cut the ropes from her wrists, his hunting knife making short work of the hemp. Angry red marks circled her skin where the bindings had cut deep. "Wrap your arms around my waist when I mount up," he instructed, gathering the reins. "Don't let go, no matter how rough the ride gets." Emma nodded weakly, her face pale beneath her loose hair. Oliver swung up behind her, pulling her close against his chest to keep her secure. The mule's muscles bunched as he urged it forward, picking up speed as they left the last buildings behind. They rode hard toward the foothills, the mule's hooves throwing up plumes of snow. Oliver kept them to the tree line, avoiding open ground where they'd be visible from town. The winter sun cast long shadows as they climbed higher into the mountains, following game trails and hidden paths only a seasoned woodsman would know. Emma remained silent through the journey, though her grip never slackened. Oliver could feel the slight swell of her belly pressed against his arms, reminding him of the precious cargo he carried. Hours passed as they wound through stands of pine and aspen, the temperature dropping as dusk approached. Finally, as the light began to fade, Oliver guided them toward a small clearing. His line shack stood tucked beneath towering pines, weathered logs nearly invisible against the darkening forest. Smoke-blackened snow around the chimney showed where he'd last stayed, though the cabin itself looked cold and empty now. "Here we are," he said softly, drawing the mule to a halt. "Let's get you inside before full dark." Emma's fingers had gone stiff with cold as he helped her down. She stumbled when her feet touched ground, and Oliver caught her before she could fall. Without a word, he scooped her up again and carried her to the cabin's narrow door. The interior was sparse but neat, a small hearth, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot along one wall. Oliver set Emma down near the cold fireplace, quickly striking a match to kindle the kindling he'd left prepared. Soon, orange flames began to lick at the dry wood. "Rest there," he said, gesturing to the cot. "I'll brew some coffee to warm you." Emma sank onto the thin mattress, drawing her knees up as she watched him with wary eyes. The firelight cast dancing shadows across her face as Oliver moved about the cabin, measuring coffee grounds into a battered pot. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Oliver paused in his work, keeping his back turned. Because what they were doing wasn't right. No law worth following would hang a woman carrying a child. "And now?" Her words held a tremor of fear. "What do you mean to do with me?" He turned then, meeting her gaze directly. "Nothing but keep you safe, Mrs. Stoltzfus. You're free to go when you choose, though I reckon that judge won't stop hunting you easily. Here at least you're beyond his reach for now." Some of the tension left Emma's shoulders, though she remained curled protectively around her middle. Oliver set the coffee to brew and headed for the door. "Need to fetch water and more firewood before full dark," he explained. "Bolt the door behind me if you wish, I won't think ill of it." He trudged through deepening snow to the frozen creek that ran behind the cabin. The sound of his axe rang through the trees as he split logs, then filled his buckets with ice-cold water. When he returned, the door remained unbolted, though Emma had drawn further into the corner of the cot. The coffee was ready by then, its rich aroma filling the small space. Oliver poured 2 tin cups, setting one near Emma before retreating to give her space. She wrapped her fingers around the warm metal, letting out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she murmured, sipping carefully at the strong brew. Night fell quickly in the mountains and snow began falling in earnest outside. Oliver added logs to the fire, the flames casting warm light through the single-room cabin. Emma's eyes grew heavy, though she fought to keep them open. "Sleep if you can," Oliver said gruffly. "You're safe here." As if his words had granted permission, Emma's exhaustion finally overtook her. She curled onto her side, still fully dressed, her dark hair spilling across the rough pillow. For a long while, only the crack of burning wood and the soft sound of her breathing filled the cabin. Then, in the deepest part of night, Emma stirred. Her voice rose soft, but clear in the darkness as she began to pray. Lord, watch over Jacob wherever he may be, she whispered, her words catching. Keep him safe until we can be together again. Protect this child that grows beneath my heart. Oliver stood in the doorway, having just returned from checking his mule. The prayer struck him like a physical blow, memories rising unbidden. His wife Mary's voice lifted in similar supplications. His young son's small hands folded in evening prayer. Both long gone now, taken by mountain fever one bitter winter, much like this one. Emma's voice broke on her final, Amen, and Oliver heard her quiet weeping. He remained still, giving her privacy in her grief while fighting back ghosts of his own. Outside, snow continued to fall steadily, muffling all sound from the world beyond their small sanctuary. Finally, Emma's tears subsided into the even breathing of exhausted sleep. Oliver moved silently to the cabin's single window, settling into a chair with his rifle across his knees. He would stand guard through the night, watching the snow-shrouded forest for any sign of pursuit. Looking at Emma's sleeping form, Oliver made a silent pledge. He had failed to protect his own family years ago, but he would not fail this woman and her unborn child. Whatever came for them would have to go through him first. The night deepened, and still, Oliver kept his vigil. Snow drifted past the window like falling stars, while the fire burned low on the hearth. In her sleep, Emma murmured something in Pennsylvania Dutch, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. Oliver added another log to the fire, its warm light holding back the darkness for one more hour. Dawn crept over the mountains in pale fingers of light, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Oliver rose from his vigil by the window, joints creaking from the long night. He glanced at Emma, still sleeping soundly on the cot, before quietly gathering his trapline gear. The morning air bit sharp and clean as he stepped outside. Fresh powder had fallen through the night, smoothing over their tracks from yesterday. Good fortune, he thought. That would make them harder to follow. Oliver moved through the forest with practiced stealth, checking the snares he'd set days before. The first two traps were empty, but the third held a plump snowshoe hare, its winter white fur blending with the snow. A second rabbit waited in the fifth trap. Oliver quickly and humanely dispatched them both, saying a quiet thanks as his Apache neighbors had taught him years ago. Fresh meat would do the woman good, especially in her condition, when he returned. To the cabin, Emma was already awake and trying to kindle the banked fire. Her fingers fumbled with the flint, unused to the task. Without comment, Oliver knelt beside her and showed her how to properly strike the spark, letting her take over once the tinder caught. I brought breakfast, he said, holding up the rabbits. Need to dress them first. I can cook them, Emma offered quickly, straightening her back. I may be with child, but I am not helpless. Let me contribute something for your kindness. Oliver studied her for a moment, noting the determined set of her jaw. Fair enough. I'll clean them while you heat water. They worked in companionable silence, Emma moving carefully around the small cabin while Oliver skinned and dressed the rabbits outside. When he brought the meat in, she had water boiling and roots from his storage barrel already chopped. Found some dried herbs too, she said, gesturing to small bundles hanging from the rafters. If you don't mind my using them? Help yourself. Been a while since these walls smelled of proper cooking. Emma's skilled hands made quick work of preparing a hearty stew, adding wild onions and the last of Oliver's preserved carrots to the pot. As the aroma filled the cabin, Oliver's stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Smells good, he said, breaking the silence. But while it cooks, there's something we need to discuss. He settled into his chair by the fire. What's your full story, Mrs. Stoltzfus? Why was that judge so dead set on hanging you? Emma stirred the pot slowly, considering her words. My husband, Daniel. He's half Chiricahua Apache. His mother was Pennsylvania Dutch like me. Fell in love with a man from the reservation. She smiled sadly. Much like I did with her son. We married 3 years ago, against both families' wishes. And now he's gone missing. They accused him of stealing horses from the mining company. But Daniel would never... Her voice caught. He's proud, yes, and sometimes quick to anger when people slight him. But he's honest. Someone framed him, I'm certain of it. Oliver leaned forward. The judge condemned you for harboring him? That was their excuse. Emma's eyes flashed with unexpected fire. But the truth is, they want our land. We have a spring on our farm, pure sweet water that runs year-round. The railroad's been trying to buy it since they started laying track toward the mines. Ah. Oliver nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. Water rights. Now that makes more sense of the judge's eagerness to see you hang. A spring like that would be worth plenty to the railroad, especially if they're planning to run steam engines through. Daniel and I refused to sell. The spring belonged to his mother's family, passed down through her to him. It's sacred land, he says, not just property to be bought and sold. And with you both gone, the land would default to the county, right into the judge's hands. Oliver spat into the fire. Convenient for him. Emma ladled the stew into 2 battered tin bowls. They took everything else, our livestock, our stored grain, but they can't take the deed unless... She rested one hand protectively over her belly. Unless there's no heir to inherit, Oliver finished grimly. That's why they couldn't wait for a proper trial. Had to get rid of you and the baby both. They ate in thoughtful silence, the stew warming them from within. Oliver had to admit it was the best meal he'd had in months. When they finished, he showed Emma where to stack the newly cut firewood, teaching her how to check for rot and arrange the pieces so they would dry properly. Need to patch some holes in the roof too, he said, pulling out tools and materials. Snow's likely to get heavier soon. Emma insisted on helping despite his protests, handing up boards and nails as Oliver worked. Their conversation grew easier, punctuated by small jokes and shared observations about the weather. But underlying tension remained in Emma's careful movements and watchful eyes. How long before they start searching? She asked finally, voicing the fear they'd both been avoiding. They're probably already out there, Oliver admitted. But they'll check the easier paths first. Not many know these high trails, especially in winter. As if his words had summoned them, the sound of distant hoofbeats carried through the evening air. Emma froze, her face going pale. Oliver quickly doused the fire, plunging the cabin into darkness. Down to the cellar, he whispered, already moving to grab his rifle. There's a space behind the root barrels. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Emma nodded, slipping through the trapdoor into the cramped storage space below. Oliver closed it after her, throwing a rug over the top. He took up position by the window, rifle ready but held low where its metal wouldn't catch any stray light. The riders passed along the ridge above the cabin, their horses' hooves muffled by snow. 3 men, Oliver counted, moving slow and careful. They paused briefly at the top of the rise, voices carrying faintly on the wind. Then, to his relief, they continued on, heading deeper into the mountains. Long minutes passed before Oliver dared to rekindle a small fire. He helped Emma from the cellar, noting how she trembled despite her brave face. They'll be back, she said softly, standing close to the warmth of the flames. Yes, Oliver agreed. No point in lying. But we'll be ready. Get some rest now. I'll keep watch again tonight. Emma touched his arm briefly. Thank you, Mr. Boone. I know helping me puts you at risk too. Oliver just nodded, moving back to his post by the window. Outside, darkness settled over the snow-covered forest, hiding whatever dangers tomorrow might bring. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow as Oliver hitched his mule to a rough-hewn sled. He'd spent hours reinforcing the wooden rails and checking the leather traces, knowing they couldn't risk a breakdown on the trail. Emma stood in the cabin doorway, wrapped in every blanket he could spare. "It's time we see what's left of your farm," Oliver said, adjusting the harness one final time. "Can't hide up here forever, and you need proper shelter before that baby comes." Emma nodded, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "I know, but what if the judge's men are watching?" "That's why we're going now." Oliver helped her onto the sled, tucking the blankets tight around her legs. They've been searching the high country for days, likely pulled back to town to warm up and resupply. The mule picked its way carefully down the snowy trail, Oliver walking alongside with his rifle ready. Every few minutes he scanned the ridgelines for movement, but the mountains stayed silent except for the crunch of snow and the occasional cry of a hunting hawk. Emma sat straight-backed despite the jolting ride, her eyes fixed ahead. "The spring will still be flowing," she said softly. "Even in winter, it never freezes. Daniel says it comes from deep in the earth, where the water stays warm." Oliver glanced at her determined face, seeing the strength beneath her gentle demeanor. "Tell me more about your farm. Help me know what we're heading into." "We have had 20 acres. Most still uncleared, but good soil in the meadow where we grew corn and wheat. A small orchard, too, though the trees are young." Her voice grew wistful. "The house isn't much. 2 rooms downstairs, 2 up. But Daniel built it himself, every beam and board." They stopped at midday to rest the mule and share a cold meal of dried meat and hard biscuits. Emma's cheeks were red from the wind, but she didn't complain. When Oliver offered to turn back, she shook her head firmly. "I need to see it," she said. "Need to know what they've done to our home." The sun was setting when they finally crested the last rise above Emma's farm. Oliver heard her sharp intake of breath at the site below. The house stood dark and empty, windows gaping like hollow eyes. The barn doors hung crooked on broken hinges, swinging with each gust of wind. Even from here, he could see scattered debris in the yard, broken furniture, torn sacks of grain, an overturned wagon. "Oh, Lord, have mercy," Emma whispered, her hands clasped tight. Oliver helped her down from the sled, supporting her as they made their way through deep snow to the house. Inside was worse than the exterior suggested. Every drawer had been dumped, every cupboard emptied. Glass crunched under their boots from shattered windows. The table lay on its side, 3 legs snapped off. Even the bed frames upstairs had been torn apart, straw mattresses slashed and scattered. Emma stood in the middle of her ruined kitchen, trembling, one hand pressed against her belly as if protecting the child from the sight of such destruction. But when Oliver touched her shoulder, she straightened her spine. "Well," she said, her voice only slightly unsteady, "standing here won't put things right. Is there any lamp oil left in that cupboard? We'll need light to work." Oliver found an unbroken lamp and matches. While Emma began gathering broken crockery from the floor, he retrieved his tools from the sled. The windows needed covering before night brought the bitter cold. He worked steadily, nailing planks across the empty frames while Emma swept debris into piles, humming softly under her breath. The tune was unfamiliar to him, some old Amish hymn that spoke of perseverance and faith. The moon was rising when movement caught Oliver's eye. He reached for his rifle, then relaxed slightly as he recognized the figure approaching through the snow. An older woman carrying a covered basket, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. "Mrs. Stoltzfus?" the woman called softly. "Emma, child, are you there?" "Mrs. Yates?" Emma hurried to the door. "Oh, it's good to see a friendly face." The widow stepped into the lamplight, setting down her basket. "I've brought eggs and fresh bread. Not much, but, well, we've all been worried sick about you." She hugged Emma carefully. "Such terrible things they're saying in town, but I never believed them, not for a minute. Your Daniel's a good man, no matter what his heritage." Other shapes moved in the darkness beyond the yard, neighbors standing back uncertainly, watching the house. Some held lanterns, their lights bobbing like fireflies in the gathering dark. None approached closer, but their presence felt more protective than threatening. "They're afraid," Mrs. Yates explained quietly. The judge has been making examples of anyone who speaks against him, but not everyone supports what he's doing, Emma. Remember that. Oliver kept working as the women talked, mending hinges and securing doors. His ears stayed alert for any sound of horses approaching from town. But the night remained peaceful, broken only by the tap of his hammer and the soft murmur of feminine voices from the kitchen. Mrs. Yates helped Emma make up a bed upstairs with blankets she'd brought, then reluctantly took her leave. "I'll come check on you tomorrow," she promised, "and I'll spread word quiet like that you're back. There are others who will help once they're sure it's safe." After she left, Emma stood at the window, watching the distant lanterns disperse into the darkness. "I didn't expect—" She paused, wiping her eyes. "I thought everyone had turned against us." "People's hearts often prove kinder than their fears," Oliver said, banking the fire for the night. "Get some rest upstairs. I'll sleep down here by the hearth, keep watch." Emma nodded, gathering her shawl. "Mr. Boone, thank you for everything." "Oliver," he said gruffly, "might as well use my given name, circumstances being what they are." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Very well. Good night then, Oliver." He watched her climb the stairs, one hand trailing along the wall for balance. The floorboards creaked overhead as she settled into the makeshift bed. Oliver spread his bedroll near the fire, rifle close at hand. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and steady. The broken house creaked and sighed around them, but somewhere beneath the damage, he sensed its bones were still strong. Like Emma herself, it would survive. Tomorrow they would continue repairs, seal up more of the gaps where winter crept in. But for now, they had shelter, a warm fire, and the knowledge that not everyone in the valley wished them harm. It was a beginning, however small. Oliver leaned back against the wall, watching flames dance behind the grate. The first step toward Emma's survival had been taken, but the harder challenge, dealing with the judge and his men, still lay ahead. For tonight, though, they could rest. Morning would bring its own trials soon enough. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in soft, pink light. Emma stood at her kitchen window, hands deep in bread dough, when the first wagon appeared on the road. Her shoulders tensed until she recognized Mrs. Yates at the reins, accompanied by several other women from town. Oliver materialized in the doorway, rifle ready. "Stay inside. I'll see what they want." "No need," Emma said, wiping flour from her hands. "Those are friendly faces." The wagon creaked to a stop in the yard. Mrs. Yates climbed down first, followed by Sarah Miller, the cooper's wife, and Hannah Reed, who ran the general store. Each woman carried baskets and bundles. "We thought you might need a few things," Mrs. Yates called out, her breath visible in the cold morning air. "Brought what we could spare." Emma hurried to meet them, touched by their boldness in coming openly to her farm. The women crowded into her kitchen, setting their offerings on the newly righted table: sacks of flour, fresh milk in glass bottles, preserved fruit, and carefully folded quilts. "My Thomas said I was foolish to come," Hannah Reed admitted, unwrapping a loaf of yesterday's bread. "But I told him some things matter more than being prudent." Sarah Miller nodded, her round face serious. "The way they treated you at that mockery of a trial, it wasn't right. My grandmother was Shoshone, you know. Never told anyone in town except my Herbert." The women clustered around the stove where Emma's dough was rising. Oliver had withdrawn to the barn, giving them privacy, though Emma noticed he kept within earshot. "Tell us true," Mrs. Yates said softly. "Have you heard anything from Daniel?" Emma shook her head, kneading the dough with steady motions. "Not since they drove him away with those false accusations. But I know in my heart he's alive. He'll find his way back when he can." The women exchanged glances. Hannah reached out to pat Emma's arm. "You're a brave soul, child. Not many would stand so firm with a baby coming." "The baby is why I must stand firm," Emma replied. "This land is his inheritance, or hers. I won't let them steal it with lies and false charges. They helped her shape the dough into loaves, filling the kitchen with comfortable chatter about births and babies and home remedies. Yet beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of concern. These women knew the risks they took in helping her. Outside, the steady rhythm of Oliver's axe split the morning air as he chopped firewood. The sound was oddly comforting, solid and dependable as the man himself. Near midday, the women reluctantly prepared to leave. "We'll come again when we can," Mrs. Yates promised. "Though we may need to be more careful about it. There's talk in town." She was interrupted by the sound of horse hooves, approaching at a gallop. Oliver appeared instantly, positioning himself between the women and the road. The rider proved to be young Tommy Fletcher, who worked at the Double Bar Ranch. He reined his lathered horse to a stop, nodding respectfully to the ladies. "Mrs. Stoltzfus, ma'am, I came to warn you. The judge held court this morning. He's declared you an outlaw now, offering $500 reward for your capture." Emma's hands clutched her apron. "An outlaw? For what crime?" "Escaping lawful custody," he says. "And—" Tommy glanced uncomfortably at the other women. "And consorting with known criminals, meaning your husband. The poster says dead or alive, mum." Mrs. Yates made a sound of disgust. "That man twists the law like a snake. $500 will bring every bounty hunter and desperate soul for miles." "Already has," Tommy confirmed. "Saw 3 hard-looking men ride in from Denver this morning, studying those wanted posters mighty careful." Oliver stepped forward. "Much obliged for the warning, boy. Best you ride on now before anyone notices you here." Tommy touched his hat and wheeled his horse around. The women hurried to their wagon, faces drawn with worry. "Emma, dear," Mrs. Yates said, "perhaps you should consider—" "No." Emma's voice was firm. "I won't run. This is my home, my land. The judge has no right to drive me from it." After the wagon disappeared down the road, Oliver turned to her. "They'll come. Armed men, professionals. We can't hold them all off." "I know." Emma straightened her bonnet. "But I won't give up what's rightfully ours. Daniel and I worked too hard for this place. Our child will be born here, God willing." Oliver studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we'd best prepare. I'll finish the roof repairs first. No sense letting snow melt on our heads while we wait for trouble." They worked through the afternoon, Oliver hammering new shingles in place while Emma cleaned and organized the house, refusing to let fear rule her actions. The familiar motions of hanging herbs to dry and sweeping floors helped steady her mind. As dusk approached, Oliver built up the fire while Emma stirred a pot of rabbit stew, adding the last carrots from her root cellar. Fresh bread cooled on the table, filling the kitchen with its homey scent. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls. When the meal was done, Emma folded her hands and bowed her head. "Dear Lord," she prayed aloud, her voice clear in the quiet room. "Watch over Daniel wherever he may be. Guide his steps homeward if it be thy will. Protect this child growing beneath my heart and—" She hesitated briefly. "Thank you for sending Mr. Boone, Oliver, to help when I had no other friend. Amen." Oliver kept his head bowed for several heartbeats after she finished. When he looked up, his weathered face held an expression Emma couldn't quite read, something between pain and peace. The evening settled around them like a worn quilt, familiar despite its rough edges. Emma mended tears in her shawl by lamplight while Oliver cleaned his. Rifle, their shadows dancing on the walls. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt comfortable rather than strained. In the distance, dogs began barking. First one, then several, their voices carrying clearly in the cold night air. Oliver moved to the window, peering out at the moonlit valley. "Could be nothing," he said quietly. "Could be someone testing how close they can get." Emma's hands stilled on her mending. "I won't run," she repeated, as much to herself as to him. "No," Oliver agreed, settling back in his chair, but keeping his rifle close. "Reckon you won't." The dog's barking gradually faded, but its warning echoed in the darkness. Danger was indeed pressing closer, stalking them like wolves circling a homestead. Yet Emma felt an odd sense of peace. Here in this kitchen, with bread cooling on the counter and Oliver's solid presence nearby, she could face whatever morning might bring. She resumed her mending, needle flashing in the lamplight. The baby shifted within her, a gentle reminder of why she must remain strong. This land was more than soil and trees. It was her child's birthright, Daniel's dream, their future together. No judge's greed would take that from them. The morning frost painted delicate patterns on Oliver's coat as he mounted his mule before dawn. Emma stood in the doorway, her breath clouding in the pale light. "Be careful," she whispered. "They'll be watching for familiar faces." Oliver tugged his hood lower, obscuring his scarred features. "I aim to keep to myself. Just need to see how the wind's blowing in town." He clicked his tongue, and the mule plodded forward into the half-light. The sun had barely cleared the mountains when Oliver reached the outskirts of town. Already the streets bustled with morning activity, wagons creaking, shopkeepers sweeping their wooden walkways, children scampering to school with books clutched to their chests. His heart sank as he spotted the first wanted poster. Emma's face stared out from the rough paper, her gentle features transformed into something harder by the crude printing. The reward amount blazed in bold letters, $500. He counted 6 more posters before reaching the general store, each one driving home the gravity of their situation. Raucous voices spilled from the Silver Dollar Saloon. Judge Briggs held court on the front porch, his silver hair catching the morning light as he gestured to the crowd gathered around him. Oliver tied his mule at the hitching post, keeping his head down as he listened. "These savages mock our laws," the judge thundered, his face flushed with what Oliver suspected was more than righteous indignation. "That Stoltzfus woman harbors a horse thief, breeds with Apache blood, then has the gall to claim our good Christian land." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The judge raised his voice further. "And now she's got that mountain devil Boone protecting her, a man who's turned his back on civilization itself. Are we going to let these traitors poison our community?" "No!" several voices shouted. Oliver recognized Pete McLaren, the livery stable owner, and young Jim Tucker from the bank. "Then we must act," Briggs proclaimed. "That spring water feeds half the valley. The railroad needs it for progress, for the future of this territory. We can't let some misguided woman and her half-breed husband stand in the way of civilization." Oliver's hands clenched into fists beneath his coat sleeves. The judge's words were expertly crafted to inflame prejudice while masking his true motives. The spring water rights were worth a fortune to the railroad, and Briggs clearly meant to profit from forcing Emma out. He forced himself to turn away, entering the general store with measured steps. The bell tinkled overhead as he approached the counter where Mr. Henderson stood arranging penny candy. "Need some nails," Oliver said gruffly, keeping his voice low. "And a sack of salt." Henderson peered at him suspiciously but gathered the items without comment. Oliver counted out coins carefully, aware of every eye in the store. A woman whispered to her friend by the fabric bolts. A ranch hand fingered his gun belt meaningfully. The bell chimed again as Oliver stepped back into the street. He secured his purchases to the mule's saddle, movements unhurried despite his racing pulse. As he mounted up, the judge's voice rose again from the saloon porch. "Tomorrow night, we'll show them what law-abiding citizens think of their kind." Oliver pressed his heels to the mule's flanks, forcing himself not to ride too quickly as he left town. Only when the buildings disappeared behind him did he urge his mount to greater speed. Back at the farm, Emma had been busy with her own visitors. He found her in the yard, scattering corn for 6 chickens that had wandered back to their old home. The familiar sounds of clucking and scratching lent an oddly peaceful air to the scene. "They came home this morning," Emma said softly as Oliver dismounted. "Like they knew where they belonged." Before he could respond, movement caught his eye. 2 small figures darted out from behind the barn. Jimmy and Sarah Wilson, the blacksmith's children. Sarah clutched a cloth-wrapped package to her chest. Mrs. Stoltzfus, Jimmy called in a loud whisper. Ma sent this. He glanced around nervously as his sister held out the package. Emma unwrapped it to find a small sack of cornmeal. Sarah reached for Emma's hand with dirty fingers. We pray for you every night, the little girl confided. Ma says you're carrying an angel in your tummy, and angels need protecting. Emma's eyes grew bright with tears as she hugged both children. Thank you, she whispered. Thank your mother for me. Now run along home before you're missed. They watched the children scamper away through the trees. Emma cradled the cornmeal like a precious gift. There's still goodness in people's hearts, she said quietly, even when fear tries to poison everything. Oliver's jaw tightened. Fear's winning in town. The judge has them worked up proper now. He's calling for action tomorrow night. He met her eyes gravely. They mean to burn you out, Emma. She pressed one hand to her swollen belly, but her voice remained steady. What do we do? Oliver looked toward the well. The pump handle stood at an awkward angle, ice crusted around its base. First thing is to get that well working. Without water, we can't fight fire, or anything else. Emma nodded. I'll fetch the toolbox from the barn. The sun wheeled across the sky as Oliver wrestled with frozen bolts and rusted pipes. Emma held a lantern as darkness fell, its light gleaming off the frost that reformed almost as quickly as Oliver could chip it away. His curses formed white clouds in the bitter air. Damnation, he growled as another bolt stripped. This iron's fighting me every inch. Perhaps it just needs persuading instead of forcing, Emma suggested mildly. A ghost of a smile crossed Oliver's face as he tried a gentler approach with the wrench. Hours crept by. The moon rose, casting sharp shadows across the yard. Emma's arms trembled from holding the lantern steady, but she didn't complain. Finally, near midnight, Oliver made one last adjustment to the pump handle. Try it now, he said, straightening with a grunt. Emma set down the lantern and gripped the handle with both hands. It moved stiffly at first, then with growing ease as she worked it up and down. Suddenly, water gushed from the spout, steaming slightly in the freezing air. Oh! Emma laughed in delight as the stream splashed her skirts. Oliver found himself chuckling too, the sound rusty with disuse. For just a moment, the night felt warmer as they shared their small victory. The water continued flowing strong and clear, a lifeline restored. Emma filled a bucket, then another. This means we can refill the rain barrels, she said. Have water ready when we need it. Oliver nodded, sobering as he remembered the threat ahead. But watching Emma's determined movements in the lamplight, he felt a fierce pride in her resilience. They had water now. It wasn't much against a mob, but it was something. Sometimes a small triumph could light the way through dark times. The chickens clucked softly in their rebuilt coop. The repaired pump handle gleamed dully in the moonlight. They were small signs of order restored, of life persisting despite all attempts to destroy it. Oliver picked up the lantern, its flame steady against the darkness pressing in from all sides. The morning dawned white and hushed. Fresh snow blanketed the farm, transforming broken fences into pristine sculptures. Oliver stood at the kitchen window watching fat flakes swirl down from laden clouds. The weather might slow the townsmen, but it also trapped them here. He turned to find Emma at the table, kneading bread dough with steady hands. Time you learn to shoot? He said abruptly. Emma's fingers stilled in the flour. I cannot take a life, she said softly. It goes against everything I believe. Ain't asking you to kill, Oliver replied, pulling his old Colt revolver from its holster. But those men coming, they need to know you can defend yourself. He laid the weapon on the table, its worn grips facing her. Sometimes just showing steel is enough to turn trouble away. Emma regarded the gun as if it were a serpent. Daniel never carried weapons, she said. He believed in peace, even when others scorned him for it. Daniel ain't here, Oliver said, more gruffly than he intended. And those rider coming, Don't share his gentle ways. He softened his tone at her flinch. Just let me show you. For the little one's sake, if nothing else. Her hand drifted to her rounded belly. After a long moment, she nodded. Very well. But I pray I never need to use it. Oliver led her to the back of the house where an old stump stood near the woodpile. The snow crunched beneath their boots as he demonstrated how to hold the revolver, explaining the basics of aim and trigger pressure. Emma listened intently, though her hands trembled when he placed the weapon in them. Keep both eyes open, he instructed, adjusting her grip. Sight down the barrel at that knot in the wood. He stepped back. When you're ready, squeeze gentle-like. Don't jerk it. Emma drew a deep breath. The gun roared, kicking in her hands. She gasped, nearly dropping it as splinters flew from the stump. A clean hit, better than Oliver expected for a first try. Good, he said simply, taking the weapon back. That'll do for now. We can practice more later if you've a mind to. Emma rubbed her hands on her apron, as if trying to erase the feel of the gun. I pray that knowledge never proves necessary, she said quietly. But I thank you for teaching me. They had just reached the back door when Emma suddenly clutched her belly, breath catching. Oliver steadied her as she swayed. The baby? He asked, heart racing. I think so, she gasped, but after a few tense moments the pain eased. No, she said, managing a weak smile. False pains. I've had them before. Oliver helped her inside to sit by the fire, his hands awkward with concern. You need to rest more, he insisted. No more heavy work. I'm with child, not made of glass, Emma protested, but she settled into the chair without further argument. Oliver went out to split more wood, trying to shake off his lingering worry. The crack of his axe echoed across the snow-muffled yard as he worked. The exercise helped calm him, though he couldn't say why Emma's false labor had rattled him so deeply. He was stacking the split logs when he noticed it, a dark smudge against the white sky. At first he thought it just storm clouds, but the smell reaching his nostrils told different. Smoke, he muttered, squinting at the horizon. Arinina Madrian, too much for chimney fire. He hurried inside to find Emma already at the window, face drawn with concern. The Mitchell place, she said softly, and the Weber farm beyond. They helped us with food yesterday. Oliver's jaw tightened. The judge's men were sending a message burning out anyone who showed Emma kindness. The smoke stains grew darker against the falling snow. As evening approached, they heard hoofbeats on the road. Oliver reached for his rifle, but Emma laid a hand on his arm as voices called out. Women's voices, children crying. The Mitchell family stood huddled at the door, faces smoke-smeared, clutching. What little they'd saved. Sarah Mitchell held her youngest tight against her shoulder while 3 older children pressed against her skirts. They burned us out, she said simply. Said it was justice for helping outlaws. Her voice broke. We've nowhere else to go. Come in, Emma said without hesitation. The children must be freezing. She was already moving to stir up the fire, directing the older kids to help her lay out blankets. Oliver watched from the doorway as Emma transformed his sparse cabin into a refuge. She set water to boil for tea, brought out her fresh-baked bread, and found clean rags to wipe small faces. The children slowly stopped crying as she got them settled near the hearth. More refugees arrived as night fell, the Webers, then old Widow Jones from the Creek farm. Emma found space for them all, sharing what food they had, speaking soft words of comfort. When the youngest Mitchell girl couldn't sleep, Emma began to pray aloud, her clear voice rising above the wind outside. Lord, we thank you for this shelter and these good people beside us. Guide us through this storm, strengthen our hearts against fear, and help us remember that love is stronger than hatred. Oliver watched the tension ease from drawn faces as she spoke. Even Jim Weber, a hardened rancher who'd lost everything that day, bowed his head, at her words. The children drifted to sleep, their breathing steady in the fire-lit darkness. Looking at Emma in that moment, her face serene despite their dire circumstances, her presence bringing peace to this crowded cabin, Oliver felt something shift inside his chest. This woman was more than just someone to protect. Her quiet strength drew people to her like moths to flame, her faith lighting the way through darkness. He thought of his own years of solitude, of the bitterness he'd nursed after losing his family. Emma's gentle ways were beginning to crack that shell, showing him that perhaps there were different kinds of strength than he'd known. The snow continued falling outside, blanketing their tracks, hiding them from those who meant harm. Inside, Emma moved among their guests, adjusting blankets, humming soft hymns. Her belly curved proud beneath her apron, a promise of new life despite all that threatened them. Oliver added wood to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, they had this moment of grace. This woman had turned his line shack into something he'd forgotten could exist. A home, filled with the warmth of human hearts beating together against the cold. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the fresh snow glittering like scattered diamonds across the yard. Oliver helped the Mitchell family load their few belongings onto their wagon, the wooden wheels creaking against the frozen ground. Sarah Mitchell hugged Emma tightly, whispering thanks as her children clambered aboard. "My sister's place near Castle Rock will shelter us," Sarah said, adjusting her shawl. "At least until we can rebuild." She squeezed Emma's hand. "We'll pray for you daily, friend." Emma pressed a loaf of bread into Sarah's hands. "God be with you on your journey," she said softly. "Stay safe." Oliver mounted his horse to guide them, knowing the safest routes through the backcountry. The Weber family and Widow Jones had already departed at first light, heading for relatives in different directions. As he led the Mitchells' wagon away from the farm, he glanced back to see Emma standing in the doorway, her figure growing smaller until a bend in the road hid her from view. The journey to Castle Rock took most of the morning. Oliver rode ahead of the wagon, scanning for trouble, but they encountered only a few deer browsing in the snow-laden pines. When they reached Sarah's sister's homestead, the reunion was tearful but warm. Oliver waited only long enough to ensure the Mitchells were safely settled before turning his mount toward Emma's farm. The sun hung low in the western sky by the time he returned. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window he could see Emma working at the kitchen table. The sight tugged at something deep in his chest, but he pushed the feeling aside as he dismounted. Inside, Emma had transformed the cabin back to its usual order. A pot of water bubbled on the stove, and she sat mending one of the quilts that had been used by their overnight guests. She looked up as Oliver stomped snow from his boots. Were they safely delivered?" she asked, setting aside her needlework. Oliver nodded, hanging his coat by the door. "Sarah's sister took them in proper. They'll be fine there till spring thaw." Emma returned to her stitching, her fingers moving steadily through the fabric. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice distant. "I dreamed of Daniel last night." Oliver stilled, one hand on the back of a chair. He'd known this conversation would come eventually, but that didn't make it easier. "In my dream, he was walking through snow, just like today," Emma continued. "But he was coming home to us." Her hand drifted to her belly. "Sometimes I feel so certain he's still alive out there, that he'll return to meet his child." Oliver busied himself with stoking the fire, grateful for the excuse to hide his face. "Hope's a powerful thing," he said gruffly, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. "The good book says faith can move mountains," Emma replied. "Surely it can bring a lost husband home." Oliver said nothing, jabbing at the logs harder than necessary. He had no right to the ache in his chest, the wish that her dreams might fade. She was another man's wife, carrying another man's child. His job was to protect her, nothing more. The afternoon wore on quietly. Emma continued her mending while Oliver cleaned his rifle and checked their supplies. The comfortable silence between them felt different now, charged with things unsaid. As dusk approached, they heard the jingling of harness bells. Oliver had his rifle in hand before Emma could rise, but the sound was accompanied by a familiar call. "Hello, the house, anyone home for trading?" "It's just old Samuel," Emma said, relieved. "The peddler who comes through every month." Oliver lowered his weapon but remained watchful as he opened the door. Samuel sat perched on his wagon seat, his ancient mule stamping in the snow. The peddler's cart was loaded with goods, pots, blankets, tools, and sundries for isolated homesteads. "Evening, folks," Samuel called cheerfully. "Might I interest you in some fine wares? Got fresh coffee beans from Denver, new ribbons for the lady." "Come in and warm yourself," Emma invited, already reaching for the kettle. "You must be half frozen." The old man climbed down stiffly, following them inside. As Emma poured coffee, Samuel's eyes darted between her and Oliver, clearly curious about their unusual living arrangement, but too wise to come at it directly. "Heard interesting news up at Fort Morgan," he said instead, warming his hands around the cup. "Army patrol brought in a wounded man a few days back. Half Indian fellow, they said. Name of Stoltzfus." Emma's cup clattered against its saucer. "Daniel?" she whispered. "He's alive?" Samuel nodded. "That's the name I heard. Caught some trouble with horse thieves by all accounts. The real ones, not what he was accused of. Took a bullet defending the army's remounts from raiders." Emma sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Thank God he lives." Oliver stood rigid by the fireplace, his heart a stone in his chest. He should feel relieved. This was answer to Emma's prayers. Instead, he found himself fighting an urge to silence the old peddler. "How bad was he hurt?" he made himself ask. "Not mortal, from what I gathered," Samuel replied. "Shoulder wound, mostly healed now, but the army's keeping him close, seeing as how he helped them and all. Might help clear his name in time." Emma was practically glowing with joy. "We must go to him," she said. "Oliver? Surely now?" "You can't travel," Oliver cut in, more sharply than he intended. "Not in your condition, not with snow in the passes." He took a breath, steadying himself. "I'll go. First light tomorrow. I'll ride for Fort Morgan." Emma rose and caught his hand in both of hers. "Would you? Oh, Oliver, thank you." The pure gratitude in her eyes was almost more than he could bear. Samuel stayed only long enough to trade some coffee and sugar for Emma's fresh eggs before continuing his rounds. After he left, Emma moved about the cabin in a happy daze, humming hymns as she prepared their supper. Oliver ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. That night, he lay awake long after Emma had gone up to bed, staring at the ceiling. The right path lay clear before him. Find Daniel, bring him home to his wife and coming child. It was the honorable thing, the only thing he could do. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma standing in the doorway, waiting not for Daniel, but for him. Dawn found him already saddled and ready to ride. Emma insisted on wrapping journey bread and jerky for him, tucking the provisions into his saddlebags with careful hands. "Be careful," she said softly. "And Oliver, thank you for everything." He couldn't trust himself to speak, so he simply nodded and turned his mule toward the trail. The morning was bitterly cold, his breath frosting in the air as he rode. He hadn't felt this alone since the days after his family died, though he told himself it was for the best. 2 days of hard riding brought him to the edges of ranch country. The snow wasn't as deep here, but the wind cut like a knife across the open range. Near sunset, he spotted a campfire glowing in a sheltered draw and rode toward it cautiously. The man tending the fire proved to be a rancher named Peterson, driving cattle to winter pasture. He welcomed Oliver to share his coffee and beans, grateful for news from the high country. "Stoltzfus?" Peterson said when Oliver asked. "Yeah, I saw him at the fort last week. Army's got him helping break horses. He's got away with them, that one. Some still want him arrested, but the captain's taking his side now, after that business with the horse thieves." Oliver shared his jerky with the rancher, gathering what information he could. Daniel had indeed been wounded defending army horses from real rustlers, proving his own innocence in the process. But he'd been unable to send word to Emma, believing her safely hidden with her kin. "Good man for all his mixed blood," Peterson commented. "Shame how some folks treated him." Oliver grunted agreement, though the words "good man" stuck in his throat. He spent a cold night by Peterson's fire, then rode on at first light. The fort was still a day's journey ahead, through country he didn't know well. But he pressed on, driven by duty and the memory of Emma's joy at news of Daniel. The miles passed slowly, marked by the steady plod of his mule's hooves through snow and mud. Oliver had traveled alone most of his life, yet somehow this journey felt longer than any he'd made before. Each step carried him closer to the end of something he hadn't known he wanted until it was already lost. The fort's weathered walls rose against the pale winter sky like weathered bones. Oliver pulled his mule to a halt, studying the mounted sentries who paced the ramparts. Getting in would be easy enough, it was getting Daniel out that worried him. Approaching the gate, he kept his hands visible. "Name's Oliver Boone," he called up, "here to see the commander about Daniel Stoltzfus." The guards exchanged glances before one disappeared into the courtyard. Minutes crawled past while Oliver waited, snow settling on his shoulders. Finally, the heavy gates creaked open. "Commander's at mess," a corporal informed him. "You can stable your mule and wait in the guardhouse." Oliver followed the soldier across the muddy parade ground. The fort buzzed with activity despite the cold. Horses being exercised, supplies unloaded, soldiers drilling. Near the corrals, he spotted several Apache scouts talking with a lieutenant, their faces grave. The guardhouse was warm at least, heated by a pot-bellied stove. Oliver stood near it, thawing his frozen fingers while watching men come and go. An hour passed before a harried-looking captain finally appeared. "I'm Captain Wallace," the officer said. "You're here about Stoltzfus?" "Yes, sir. How is he?" The captain's expression tightened. "Not well, I'm afraid. Wounds gone bad. Fever set in 3 days ago. He's in the infirmary now." Oliver's jaw clenched. "I need to see him. Follow me." The infirmary occupied the fort's old storehouse. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of carbolic acid and illness. Cots lined the walls, most empty save one in the far corner where a figure lay curled beneath gray blankets. Daniel looked smaller than Oliver expected, his bronze skin ashen with fever. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead despite the room's chill. The bandage on his left shoulder was stained yellow-brown. "Bullet took him high in the shoulder," Captain Wallace explained quietly. "Clean through, but infection set in. Army surgeon's done what he can." "What about the horse theft charges?" Oliver demanded. "The ones that drove him from his farm?" The captain shook his head. "No evidence was ever presented, just accusations from some judge down in mining country. We've had no official warrant, which is why we've kept him here instead of the stockade, especially after he helped us catch those real rustlers." "Then why not release him?" "Paperwork," Wallace said with a grimace. "Needs to go through proper channels. Could take weeks, maybe months." Oliver stared at Daniel's fevered face, remembering Emma's joy at news of him. Weeks might be too late. For Daniel, for Emma, for their child. "His wife's expecting," Oliver said. "She needs him home. I sympathize truly, but my hands are tied. Best I can do is have the surgeon look at him again tomorrow." Oliver nodded slowly. "Much obliged, Captain." He spent the rest of the day watching the infirmary from the parade ground, noting the changes of the guard, the routines of the medical orderlies. As darkness fell, he made his way to the sutler's store and bought supplies. Clean bandages, carbolic acid, willow bark for fever. Well after midnight, when the fort had grown quiet save for the sentry's footsteps, Oliver slipped from the shadows of the stables. The infirmary door was locked, but a window at the back stood slightly open for ventilation. He eased it wider and climbed through. Moonlight filtered between the boards, casting bars of silver across the floor. Daniel lay where he had before, his breathing shallow and quick. Oliver moved silently to his side, laying out his supplies. The infected wound was ugly when exposed, the flesh around it hot and swollen. Oliver cleaned it thoroughly with carbolic acid, his big hands gentle as he worked. Daniel stirred, muttering in Apache, but didn't wake. When the wound was clean, Oliver packed it with fresh bandages and helped Daniel drink some willow bark tea. He was nearly finished when Daniel's eyes flickered open, glazed but alert. His hand shot out, gripping Oliver's wrist with surprising strength. "Who are you?" Daniel rasped in English. "What do you want?" "Name's Oliver Boone," Oliver replied softly. "I'm here about Emma." Daniel's grip tightened. "Emma? Is she? She's alive, safe for now, but in trouble." Slowly, Oliver explained everything. The judge's attempts to hang Emma, the threats to their land, the truth behind the false charges. Daniel listened intently, his fever-bright eyes growing harder with each word. "The spring," he whispered finally. "It was always about the spring. Railroad needs water for their steam engines." He struggled to sit up. "I have to get back to her." "Easy," Oliver cautioned, supporting Daniel's shoulders. "You're in no shape to travel yet." "No choice." Daniel's voice was weak but determined. "Emma need me. Our child need me." Oliver studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but we do this smart. I'll come back tomorrow night with a plan." He spent the next day watching and listening, learning the fort's rhythms. A sympathetic sergeant in the stables, whose sister had married a Cherokee man, proved willing to help after Oliver explained the situation. "I can have 2 horses ready before dawn," the sergeant offered. "Look the other way when you ride out, but if anyone asks, I knew nothing about it." That night, Oliver returned to the infirmary. Daniel was stronger, the fever slightly reduced. Together, they made their way slowly through the shadows to the stables where the sergeant had horses waiting. "He's too weak to ride alone," Oliver told the sergeant. "We'll need a mule instead, something steady." They helped Daniel onto the mule's broad back, wrapping him in blankets against the bitter cold. The sergeant opened the corral gate, then turned away as if studying the dark hills. Oliver led the mule out, keeping to the deepest shadows. His heart pounded until they passed beyond the fort's walls, but no alarm was raised. Soon the fort was lost in darkness behind them. The journey back would be slow and dangerous. Daniel swayed in the saddle, barely conscious, while Oliver trudged beside through knee-deep snow. But with each step, they drew closer to Emma and the truth she needed to hear. Dawn painted the eastern sky blood red as they made their way down the trail. Daniel stirred, lifting his head. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why are you helping us?" Oliver walked on in silence for several steps before answering. "Because it's right," he said finally, "and because Emma's faith deserves answering." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding more than Oliver had said. They continued on as the sun rose, 2 men bound together by duty, and the love of one woman, making their way home through the endless white of winter. Emma stood at the kitchen window, holding a half-finished baby gown in her trembling hands. The tiny garment was crafted from flour sacks she had bleached white, its simple seams sewn with careful stitches. She had been working on it for days, finding solace in each thread pulled through fabric, each hem carefully turned. Outside, snow dusted the fence posts and gathered in drifts against the barn. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the yard. It had been 8 days since Oliver had departed, each sunrise bringing fresh worry, each sunset deepening her fears. She touched her swollen belly, feeling the child move within. "Your papa will come home," she whispered, as much. A prayer as a promise. Setting aside the tiny gown, she moved to check the soup simmering on the cook stove. She had taken to keeping a pot ready, hoping each day would bring Oliver's return with news of Daniel. The quiet was broken by the distant crunch of hooves in snow. Emma's heart leaped. She hurried to the window, straining to see through the gathering dusk. 2 figures emerged from the trees, one walking, leading a mule upon which slumped a second rider. "Daniel," she breathed, recognizing even at a distance the way he sat a saddle. Without pausing for a shawl, she rushed outside into the bitter cold. Oliver led the mule across the yard, his face weathered and weary from days of travel. But Emma had eyes only for Daniel. Her husband's skin was ashen, his shoulders hunched with fever and pain. Yet when he lifted his head, his dark eyes found hers with the same steady love she remembered. "Emma," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. She reached for him, tears streaming down her face as she touched his fever-hot cheek. "My love. Oh, my love." "Easy now," Oliver cautioned as Daniel tried to dismount. "He's still weak." Together, they helped Daniel down from the mule. He stumbled, legs unsteady, but Emma and Oliver supported him between them. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way to the house. Inside, warmth from the cook stove enveloped them. They eased Daniel into Emma's rocking chair near the hearth. He sank into it with a groan of pain, eyes closing briefly. "I'll see to the mule," Oliver said quietly, slipping back outside. Emma knelt beside the rocker, clasping Daniel's hand. His fingers were cold, but they tightened around hers with surprising strength. "I feared I'd lost you," she whispered. "Never," Daniel replied. His free hand moved to rest on her belly. "Our child." Growing strong. Emma smiled through her tears. "Here, you must eat something." She ladled hot soup into a bowl, adding an extra spoon of butter for strength. Daniel's hands shook too much to hold it steady, so she fed him herself, one careful spoonful at a time. Color gradually returned to his face as the warm broth revived him. Oliver returned from the barn, stamping snow from his boots. He moved to the hearth, warming his hands while giving the couple privacy. But Emma saw how his eyes kept returning to Daniel, watching for signs of failing strength. "The wound?" she asked softly. "Healing now," Oliver answered. "But the fever nearly took him. He'll need time to recover his strength." Daniel stirred in the chair. "Time we may not have," he said. "Emma must know the truth of what happened." Emma set aside the empty soup bowl, drawing her chair closer. Oliver remained by the fire, a silent guardian as Daniel began to speak. "The judge and the railroad men. They planned it all," Daniel said, voice tight with suppressed anger. "They needed our spring for their steam engines. When I wouldn't sell, they found men willing to swear I'd stolen horses. Paid them well for their lies." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. But surely there was no proof. None needed. Not with Briggs wearing the judge's robes, or Daniel's jaw clenched. "I fled thinking to find evidence of their scheme. Instead, I walked into their trap. A railroad guard shot me, claimed I'd drawn first. They would have let me die in that fort if not for Oliver." Emma looked up at the mountain man, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching to clasp his rough hand. "For bringing him home to me." Oliver nodded once, his throat too tight for words. But when Daniel reached out to grip his arm, he met the younger man's gaze. "You protected my wife when I could not," Daniel said. "You risked your life to save mine. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "No debt between friends," Oliver replied gruffly. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, wind sighed through pine boughs and rattled the newly repaired shutters. The three sat in companionable silence, each lost in thought. Emma rose to add wood to the fire. As she moved, her hand brushed the small gown she had been sewing. She picked it up, showing it to Daniel. His eyes softened as he touched the tiny sleeve. "Our child will need a father," she said quietly. "And our land needs protecting. We cannot run." "No," Daniel agreed. "We stand our ground, but not alone." He looked at Oliver. "Will you stay? Help us face what's coming?" Oliver was silent for a long moment, studying the flames. When he spoke, his voice was low but certain. "Reckon I will. Someone needs to watch your backs while you heal." Emma touched his shoulder gently. "We have broth and bread to share, and a warm hearth. You will always have a place here, Oliver Boone." The mountain man ducked his head, hiding the moisture in his eyes. But his hand covered Emma's briefly, a gesture of acceptance and thanks. Daniel watched them, seeing the trust that had grown between his wife and this stranger who was no longer strange. Despite his weakness, despite the dangers still ahead, he felt hope stirring. Together, they might yet save all that mattered. The lamp burned low as night deepened around the farmhouse. Inside, 3 people sat in its warm circle of light, a forbidden love restored, a friendship forged in crisis, a fragile alliance strengthened by shared purpose. Though tomorrow would bring new challenges, for now they had this moment of peace, of belonging, of truth finally spoken. Emma sang softly as she worked, an old Amish hymn of gratitude and praise. Daniel's eyes drifted closed, his breathing evening out in healing sleep. Oliver kept watch by the window, rifle across his knees, as constant as the North Star in the winter sky. The blizzard howled around the farmhouse, rattling windows and whistling through every tiny crack. Snow piled in deep drifts against the walls, sealing them inside like a tomb. It was their first morning of what would become 3 days of confinement. Emma stood at the cook stove, stirring a pot of beans while cornbread baked below. The warmth from the fire barely reached the corners of the room where frost crept across the glass. Behind her, Daniel sat wrapped in quilts by the hearth, his face drawn with pain and something deeper, a shadow that had nothing to do with his healing wounds. Oliver paced by the window, checking the thickness of the storm through gaps in the boards. His heavy boots made the floorboards creak. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift to Emma, then quickly away when she turned. "Storm's getting worse," he growled, more to break the silence than anything else. Daniel shifted in his chair. "Good. Keeps the judge's men away at least." Emma heard the bitterness in her husband's voice. She ladled beans into 3 bowls, adding an extra scoop to Daniel's. "Here," she said softly. "You need to keep up your strength." Daniel took the bowl but didn't meet her eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the spoon. "What strength?" he muttered. "Couldn't even protect my own wife. Had to have another man save her from the gallows." "Daniel, please," Emma touched his shoulder. "What matters is we're together now." Oliver had stopped his pacing, standing awkwardly by the window. His large frame seemed to fill too much of the small room. "Any man would have done the same," he said gruffly. "But they didn't, did they?" Daniel's voice was sharp. "They all stood there watching, ready to let her hang." His spoon clattered against the bowl. "While I lay useless in that fort, too weak to even stand." Emma knelt beside his chair. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. He sent Oliver to us for a reason." Oliver turned back to the window, his shoulders tense. Emma saw him swallow hard, fighting some emotion he wouldn't name. The silence stretched between them all, broken only by the howling wind. That evening, Emma lit the lamp and opened her father's old Bible. It had become their routine, prayers at sunset, though tonight felt different. The storm pressed closer, and with it the weight of unspoken things. "Let us pray," she said quietly. Daniel bowed his head, but his jaw was clenched. Oliver remained by his post at the window, though he turned to listen. Emma's clear voice filled the room. "Lord, we ask for guidance in these troubled times. Help us find strength in forgiveness, both of others and ourselves. Let us remember that pride can blind us to your grace." She saw Daniel's hands clench in his lap. Beside him, Oliver shifted uncomfortably. "Grant us wisdom to see beyond our fears," she continued. "Help us trust in your plan, even when the path seems dark. And Lord, we thank you for bringing us together, 3 souls united in your purpose. The second day dawned gray and cold. The storm showed no signs of breaking. They moved through the hours like ghosts, each lost in private thoughts. Daniel tried to help Emma with chores, but tired quickly, his weakness frustrating him. Oliver chopped more firewood than they could possibly need, the rhythmic thunk of his axe echoing through the house. Emma watched them both, her heart aching. She saw how Daniel's shame ate at him, how he flinched at every kindness, and she noticed Oliver's careful distance, the way he never quite looked at her directly anymore. Both men were suffering, though neither would speak of it. That night's prayers focused on humility and acceptance. Emma's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she held the Bible. By the third day, the constant confinement had worn their nerves raw. Daniel snapped at Oliver's offered help, and then immediately looked ashamed. Oliver retreated to the barn for hours despite the bitter cold. Emma felt tears threatening as she kneaded bread, but forced them back. She had to be strong for all of them. "We must trust each other," she said that evening, lighting the lamp for prayers. "No man stands alone in God's eyes. We are strongest when we stand together." Finally, on the 4th morning, the storm broke. Sunshine sparkled on fresh snow, nearly blinding in its brightness. Emma opened the door to let in fresh air, breathing deeply of the cold clarity. The peace lasted less than an hour. Oliver heard them first, the distant thunder of hoofbeats growing louder. He grabbed his rifle, face grim. Riders coming, at least a dozen. Daniel struggled to his feet, pulling a knife from his boot. Even that small movement left him pale and sweating, but his eyes were fierce. "Emma, get your father's papers. The deeds, everything, hide them." Emma ran to the chest where she kept her father's documents. Proof of their water rights, the original land grant, everything the judge wanted to destroy. Her hands shook as she lifted the false bottom. Torchlight flickered through the gaps in the boards, casting orange shadows across the walls. Voices carried on the winter air, angry and eager for blood. "Stoltzfus, come out and face justice. Burn them out. String up the Apache lover." Oliver took up position by the window, rifle ready. "Back doors blocked with snow. They've got us surrounded." Emma clutched the papers to her chest, heart pounding. Where to hide them? The cellar? The stove? Daniel touched her arm, guiding her toward the loose floorboard beneath their bed. The pounding started then. Fists on wood, boots kicking the door. The whole house seemed to shake with the fury of the mob. Emma shoved the papers into the gap beneath the floor, fingers numb with cold and fear. "This is your last chance." The judge's voice rose above the others. "Come out now or we burn you out." Daniel pressed against the wall beside the door, knife gleaming in his grip. Despite his weakness, his voice was steady. "Oliver?" The mountain man's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger. "Ready?" Emma finished replacing the floorboard and ran to join them. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand straight. These men had tried to hang her once. They wouldn't take her family from her again. The pounding grew louder, wood splintering beneath the assault. Emma reached for Danielle's free hand, feeling his fingers close around hers. On her other side, Oliver's solid presence was like a wall of strength. "Our Father," Emma whispered, "who art in heaven." The door shuddered in its frame. One more blow would break it open. Note: this scene ends exactly as instructed, with fists pounding on the farmhouse door, the mob arriving to destroy Emma's family. I've included all the required elements, the 3 days of snowbound tension, Daniel's shame, Oliver's silent feelings, Emma's prayers for forgiveness, and the arrival of the vigilantes. The scene builds naturally to the climactic moment without moving beyond it. The farmhouse door exploded inward with a thunderous crack. Splinters flew as men with torches surged through the opening. Oliver's rifle boomed, the shot deliberately high, sending the first wave scrambling backward. "That was a warning!" Oliver's voice rolled like thunder. "Next one won't be." Emma pressed against the wall, one hand on her swollen belly. Sharp pains had started minutes ago, but she fought to stay quiet. "Not now," she prayed. "Please." Lord, not now. The judge's voice carried from the yard. Bring out the half-breed. We'll make this quick. Daniel crouched by the back door, knife gleaming. His face was pale with fever, but his eyes burned. There's more coming round back, he whispered. A torch sailed through the shattered front window, landing on Emma's quilting basket. Flames leaped up the wall. Oliver kicked the burning bundle outside, but more torches followed. The barn, Emma gasped, seeing orange light flaring through the window. Their barn was catching, hay stored inside ready tinder for the flames. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time. She couldn't hold back a small cry of pain. Both men turned to her, faces etched with concern. Emma? Daniel struggled to his feet. The baby, she managed between clenched teeth. It's starting. Oliver fired another warning shot as shadows moved in the doorway. Daniel, get her upstairs. I'll hold them here. No! Daniel's voice was fierce. You take her. I'll guard the back. I can still fight. He met Oliver's eyes. Please, protect my wife. Before Oliver could respond, the back door shuddered under heavy blows. Daniel braced against it, knife ready. Go. Now. Oliver hesitated only a moment before scooping Emma into his arms. She clung to his neck as he carried her toward the stairs, trying to breathe through another contraction. Smoke was beginning to fill the lower floor. Outside, voices shouted and rifles cracked. Then new voices joined the chaos, neighbors arriving, drawn by the commotion. This ain't right. Emma recognized Mrs. Yates's voice. That woman's with child. Stand aside, woman, the judge bellowed. Justice must be served. Justice? Another neighbor spoke up. Or railroad greed? Emma heard scuffling, angry shouts. The mob was splitting, some neighbors standing against it while others joined in. Below, Daniel grunted as someone slammed into the back door. Oliver laid her gently on her bed. I have to help Daniel, he said gruffly. Will you be all right? She nodded, gasping as another pain took her. Go. The Lord will see me through. He squeezed her hand once before running back downstairs. His rifle spoke again, answered by cursing from the yard. The fighting surged back and forth through the night. Emma lost track of time, lost in waves of pain and prayer. Smoke drifted up through the floorboards. She heard Daniel shouting defiance, Oliver's rifle thundering, neighbors arguing and fighting below. Push them back! Oliver's voice rose above the din. Daniel, hold that door! They're breaking through, Daniel called back. The sound of splintering wood was followed by the meaty thud of fists meeting flesh. Emma tried to focus on her breathing, on bringing her child into the world, but terror clawed at her. The house groaned around her, timbers creaking in the heat of nearby flames. More torches flew in downstairs. The crack of gunfire grew closer. A particularly strong contraction doubled her over. This time she couldn't hold back a scream of pain. The sound carried through the house, bringing a moment's pause to the fighting. Then the judge's voice rang out. Burn them out! All of them. No, Mrs. Yates again. There's a woman in labor up there. But more torches were already flying. Smoke thickened. Emma could hear the fire spreading, eating through the dry wood of her home. Oliver appeared in the doorway, face streaked with soot. We have to move you. The house is catching. Another scream tore from her throat as he lifted her. The baby was coming, ready or not. Oliver carried her down the smoky stairs, shielding her with his body as a window shattered beside them. Daniel still held the back door, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. 3 men lay groaning at his feet. Through here, he gasped. Quick! Oliver ducked through the door with Emma. Behind them, flames were beginning to lick up the walls. The barn was fully engulfed now, casting hellish light across the snow. They made it as far as Mrs. Yates's wagon before Emma's next contraction brought them to a halt. Now, she cried. The baby's coming now. Mrs. Yates appeared through the smoke. Get her in the wagon. I'll help. Oliver laid Emma in the wagon bed as Mrs. Yates climbed in beside her. Then he turned and ran back toward the house, toward Daniel still fighting in the doorway. The two men stood shoulder to shoulder, Oliver's rifle and Daniel's knife, keeping the mob at bay. Neighbors fought neighbors in the yard. The judge's voice rose in frustrated rage as more townspeople turned against him. Emma barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to pain and pressure and Mrs. Yates's steady encouragement. "Push, child! Push!" The night fractured into moments of crystal clarity. Oliver's rifle boom, Daniel's shout of defiance, flames reaching for the stars, snow falling to sizzle in the heat, her own voice crying out to God. Then cutting through it all, a new sound split the night, high and thin and perfect. Her baby's first cry pierced the chaos like a shaft of pure light. The fighting stuttered to a halt. Men with raised fists froze mid-swing. The judge's next command died in his throat. Even the crackling flames seemed to dim. Again, that cry rose into the winter night, new life wailing its arrival to the world, demanding to be heard. Emma held her daughter to her breast, tears streaming down her face. The silence stretched. Snow fell softly. No one moved. And in that moment, bathed in firelight and starlight, Emma's clear voice rose in prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for this miracle. Let it show us the way to peace." The baby's cry came again, strong and sure. The mob's anger seemed to drain away, leaving only shame behind. Men lowered their weapons. Neighbors who had been fighting moments before stared at each other in confusion. Oliver and Daniel still stood in the doorway of the burning house, weapons ready, but no longer needed. The judge's voice had fallen silent. In the wagon, Emma cradled her daughter, this tiny life that had stopped a mob's fury with its first breath. Mrs. Yates wrapped them both in a quilt, murmuring prayers of thanks. The night was not over. The house still burned. The barn was lost, and reconciliation would not come easily. But something had changed when that baby cried. Some fever had broken. Some madness passed away. Emma looked down at her daughter's face, perfect and new in the firelight. "Welcome to the world, Luana, little one," she whispered. "You have already worked your first miracle." Through the drifting smoke, she saw Oliver and Daniel walking toward the wagon, their differences forgotten in their shared defense of her family. Behind them, neighbors were already forming bucket lines to fight the fire. The baby's cry had done what guns and knives could not. It had reminded them all of their shared humanity, their connection to something larger than hatred and greed. Emma held her daughter close, grateful for this gift of new life, this reminder of God's grace. The night's violence had been halted by the most powerful sound of all, a child's first cry, announcing hope to the world. The baby's cry echoed across the snow-covered yard, pure and innocent. The sound seemed to pierce through the hatred that had driven the mob to violence. Men who moments ago had been calling for blood now stood, frozen, torches drooping in their hands. Old Samuel Thompson, the town's retired schoolmaster, was the first to break the silence. His weathered voice cracked with emotion as he stepped forward. "Dear Lord above, what are we doing? There's a newborn child in that wagon." Martha Jenkins, who had taught Sunday school for 40 years, pushed through the crowd. "Have we lost our minds? Setting fire to a home with a woman in labor?" Her stern gaze swept across faces she had known since they were children. "Is this what the good book taught you?" More elderly townsfolk emerged from the shadows. These were the keepers of the town's conscience, those who remembered when neighbors helped neighbors through hard times. "I remember when Emma's father first settled here," Sarah Wilson called out, her white hair glowing in the firelight. "He was a God-fearing man who helped build our church with his own hands." The judge tried to rally his supporters. "Don't let sentiment cloud justice. The law must be—" "The law?" Oliver's voice boomed across the yard. He strode forward, rifle held low, but ready. "Let's talk about law, Judge Briggs." In one fluid motion, Oliver grabbed the judge's collar and began dragging him toward the church that stood at the edge of Emma's property. The judge spluttered and struggled, but Oliver's grip was iron. "What better place to face the truth than God's house?" Oliver called out. Lamplight still glowed in the church windows from evening prayer meeting. "Everyone gather round. Time for a proper hearing." Daniel, though weak from his wounds, stood straighter. "Yes, let all hear the truth at last." The crowd, caught between shame and curiosity, followed as Oliver hauled the judge up the church steps. Mrs. Yates helped Emma wrap the newborn girl warmly. Then Daniel and another neighbor carefully lifted the wagon bed like a stretcher, carrying mother and child into the church. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over the wooden pews. Oliver pushed the judge into a chair before the pulpit. "Now then," Oliver growled, "let's hear about why you were so eager to hang an innocent woman." Emma's voice, though tired from labor, carried clearly through the church. "I have something to show everyone." She nodded to Daniel, who reached into his coat and withdrew a leather document case, somehow preserved through all the violence. The judge's face went pale. "Those papers were supposed to be destroyed." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Emma said softly. She held her sleeping daughter close as Daniel opened the case and removed several yellowed documents. "My father was a careful man. He kept copies of everything." Daniel handed the papers to Oliver, who held them up to the lamplight. "Water rights," he announced, "deeded to Emma's father 20 years ago. Legal documentation of the spring's ownership, signed and witnessed. He passed them to Samuel Thompson, who put on his spectacles to examine them. These are genuine," the old schoolmaster confirmed. "Registered with the territorial office in Denver. The spring and surrounding acres belong to the Stoltzfus family. Clear as day." A murmur ran through the crowded church. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's not all," Daniel said. His voice was weak but steady. "Tell them about the railroad men, Judge. Tell them who paid you to frame me for horse theft." The judge's face turned purple. "I don't have to listen to these lies." "The railroad wanted our spring," Emma explained, looking out at her neighbors. "They needed water for their planned depot. When we refused to sell, the judge helped them try to steal it another way." She kissed her daughter's forehead. "They thought if they could hang me for harboring Daniel, the land would be forfeit to the territory. Then they could buy it cheap at auction." "My God," Martha Jenkins whispered. "Is this true, Judge Briggs?" The judge's silence was damning. One of the railroad men who had been part of the mob tried to slip away, but Oliver's voice stopped him. "Stay right there, mister. You're part of this reckoning, too." More neighbors were arriving, drawn by word of what was happening in the church. The truth spread in whispers through the crowd. Years of the judge's corruption began coming to light as people spoke up, sharing stories of suspicious rulings and lost lands. The railroad man finally broke. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he blurted. "Just pressure them to sell, that's all the company wanted. The judge is the one who suggested framing the Indian." He stopped, realizing what he'd revealed. Daniel straightened, despite his wounds. "I am half Apache," he said proudly. "But I'm also a man who works his land honestly. The judge used people's prejudice to serve his greed." The railroad man looked around the church, seeing nothing but condemnation in the faces surrounding him. Without another word, he fled into the night. Others who had been part of his crew followed, leaving the judge alone. Old Samuel Thompson stood slowly. "Judge Briggs, you have betrayed your oath of office. You have betrayed this community's trust. Most of all, you have betrayed the law you swore to uphold." "We'll be sending word to the territorial governor," Martha Jenkins added. "With these documents and witness statements, your days as circuit judge are finished." The judge seemed to deflate, his arrogance finally broken. Two men who had served as deputies stepped forward to take him into custody until territorial authorities could arrive. As they led him out, Emma's clear voice rose once more. "I forgive you, Judge Briggs. May God help you find a better path." The judge's step faltered for a moment, but he did not look back as they took him away. Outside, the fire at Emma's farm was being brought under control. Neighbors had formed bucket lines from the spring to the house, working together to save what they could. The barn was lost, but the house might yet be salvaged. Dawn was breaking over the mountains. Emma sat in a pew, nursing her daughter while Daniel rested beside her, his wounds being tended by Mrs. Yates. Oliver stood guard nearby, rifle finally lowered, but still watchful. "What will you name her?" Mrs. Yates asked softly, nodding toward the baby. Emma smiled. "Hope," she answered. "Her name is Hope." The sun rose higher, its light streaming through the church windows. Outside, neighbors were already discussing plans to help rebuild the damaged farm. The night's hatred had been washed away by truth and a baby's cry, leaving behind the bonds of community that had always been there, waiting to be remembered. Daniel reached out to touch his daughter's tiny hand. "Welcome to your home, little Hope," he whispered. "It may need some repair, but it's yours by right and law." Oliver watched them silently, his heart full of things he would never say. But there was peace in his eyes as he stood guard over the family he had helped save, as the morning light blessed them all with its promise of a new day. The next morning brought hope with the sunrise. Neighbors arrived early, wagons loaded with timber and tools. Men gathered in the yards saying damage and planning repairs, and women bustled in and out of the kitchen, bringing steaming dishes and fresh bread. "The Lord provides through community," Mrs. Yates said, setting a pot of stew on Emma's newly scrubbed table. Oliver worked at the edge of the property, his powerful shoulders straining as he wrestled new fence posts into the frozen ground. He kept his distance from the cheerful crowd, more comfortable with physical labor than celebration. By midday, the barn frame rose against the winter sky. Daniel, still weak but determined, directed the work from a chair near the well. Emma moved carefully through the thaw. The bustle, her newborn son bundled against her chest, offering water and thanks to every helper. The preacher arrived as afternoon shadows lengthened. The workers paused, gathering in the yard as he raised his hands over mother and child. "Let us bless this new life," he intoned. "Born in strife, but welcomed in peace." Emma's voice carried clear and strong through the cold air. "We have chosen his name," she announced. "He will be called Oliver after the man who saved both our lives." Her eyes found Oliver at the fence line, a name that means courage and sacrifice. Oliver's weathered face flushed. He stood awkwardly as Daniel approached, limping but steady. "Brother," Daniel said softly, gripping Oliver's shoulder. "You gave everything to protect my family when I could not. This honor is well earned." Oliver nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Though touched deeply, his restless spirit stirred. He had lived too long in wilderness solitude to feel truly at home among so many. As evening settled, the farmhouse glowed with lamplight and life. Hymns drifted through the windows, mingled with laughter and the crying of the newly named baby Oliver. Hope had returned to this corner of the frontier, though some hearts still searched for their place in it. 3 days after the rebuilding began, dawn painted the farmyard in soft gold. Emma and Daniel walked slowly between the mended fences, her arms supporting his still weakened steps. Fresh snow crunched beneath their boots as they surveyed their land. "The spring runs clear again," Daniel said, gesturing toward the restored well. "But I aim to do more than just protect our water rights." He straightened his shoulders, though pain flickered across his face. "No more hiding in shadows. I'll stand before any man who questions my right to this land or doubts my honor." Emma squeezed his arm. "The fight that matters most is against bitterness, not men." She looked up at her husband's weathered face. "We must show our son that forgiveness brings more peace than vengeance." From the barn came the sound of Oliver packing his saddlebags. Emma's heart tightened. She hurried toward him, leaving Daniel at the fence. "Please," she said, watching Oliver check his rifle and fold his spare blanket. "The winter is harsh and we need your strength." Her voice softened. "My son needs his namesake near." Oliver's hand stilled on the leather straps. Before he could answer, hoofbeats approached. The preacher rode up, dismounting with a warm smile. "Brother Oliver," he called, "will you join us for Sunday service before you ride out? The congregation wishes to thank you properly." Oliver shifted uncomfortably, unused to such attention. But something in Emma's pleading eyes and the preacher's sincere invitation made him pause. "Reckon I could stay through Sunday?" he said gruffly. "Just the once, mind." The preacher nodded, understanding in his eyes, and rode away. Oliver carried his half-packed bags back into the barn. Later, he sat alone on the porch steps, watching the sun climb above the mountains. The weight of belonging tugged at his solitary heart. Behind him, the farmhouse stirred with morning sounds, Emma singing to the baby, Daniel building the kitchen fire. Oliver's scarred hands clasped together, caught between the call of the wilderness and the unfamiliar warmth of having people who wanted him to stay. Sunday morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. The little white church filled quickly as townsfolk filed in, their boots squeaking on wooden floors. Some kept their eyes downcast, shame still fresh from the recent violence. Others moved eagerly between pews, extending hands and warm greetings, hungry to mend torn bonds. Emma sat near the front, her blue dress carefully pressed, holding baby Oliver wrapped in a soft blanket. Daniel sat beside her, his wound healing, but his pride restored. The morning light through stained glass cast colorful shadows across their faces. A hush fell over the congregation as heavy footsteps echoed in the doorway. Oliver Boone's massive frame filled the entrance, his hat clutched awkwardly in scarred hands. His presence drew all eyes, the mountain man who had changed everything. He wore his cleanest shirt, though it was still rough-worn, and his hair had been combed. The preacher's welcome smile encouraged Oliver forward. He slid into a back pew, looking uncertain until Mrs. Yates patted the seat beside her. When the congregation rose to pray, Oliver hesitated, but as the familiar words washed over him, words he hadn't heard since his wife and child died years ago, something broke inside him. Slowly, his knees bent. For the first time in more years than he could count, Oliver Boone knelt in prayer. His broad shoulders shook slightly as long-buried faith stirred back to life. After the service, neighbors surrounded him. The blacksmith offered a firm handshake. The general store owner invited him to Sunday dinner. Children tugged at his coat, no longer afraid of the giant mountaineer. Emma watched from her seat, gently rocking her son. Peace settled in her heart as she saw the community healing, knowing her family was finally safe. Daniel's hand found hers, squeezing gently. That evening, in the warm glow of the farmhouse lamps, Oliver sat in the rocking chair. In his massive arms, baby Oliver lay contentedly, tiny fingers wrapped around one rough finger. The mountain man's face had softened, transformed by the simple miracle of holding new life. Emma's quiet hymn filled the room as Daniel banked the fire, the small family bound together by providence and grace. The faith Oliver had thought forever lost had found him again, brought back by a woman's courage, a child's innocence, and the power of redemption. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.